We've all had that moment where we said something we instantly regretted, something so mortifying we wished we could disappear. For Trevor Barnes, a hard-working single dad just trying to get through life, that moment came when he was alone with Sienna Caldwell, a powerful millionaire businesswoman. He accidentally said the most inappropriate thing imaginable to her. He expected anger, maybe even fury. But what happened next shocked him completely. Sienna didn't yell or storm out. Instead, she looked at him with a calm smile and said something so unexpected that it left Trevor standing there speechless. His whole world turned upside down. What could she possibly have said that changed everything between them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's insistent beeping pulled Trevor Barnes from a dreamless sleep at 5:30 in the morning. He reached over and silenced it with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been doing this same routine for the past 3 years. The other side of the bed remained untouched, the pillow still perfectly positioned as it had been since Catherine passed away. Some mornings that empty space felt like a physical ache. Other mornings, like this one, it was simply a fact of life, something he had learned to accept the way you accept the changing seasons. Trevor sat up and rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. 42 years old, and some days he felt twice that. The house was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that exists only in the hour before children wake. He treasured these moments, though he would never admit how lonely they could be. He padded down the hallway in his worn pajama pants and t-shirt, past the closed doors of his children's rooms. Autumn's door had a hand-painted sign that read, "Princess Autumn's Castle," in wobbly letters she had carefully traced when she was 6. She was 8 now, gap-toothed and full of questions about everything. Breeson's door was covered in posters of athletes and a basketball hoop that had seen better days. At 11, his son was caught in that awkward space between childhood and adolescence. Still young enough to want his father's approval, but old enough to pretend he didn't need it. The kitchen was Trevor's domain in the early morning hours. He started the coffee maker, a machine that Catherine had bought 7 years ago that somehow kept working, despite his certainty that it would give up any day now, and began pulling out ingredients for breakfast. Oatmeal for himself, because it was cheap and filling. Cereal for the kids, because mornings were easier when he didn't have to negotiate every meal. While the coffee brewed, Trevor moved to the window above the sink and looked out at his backyard. The grass needed mowing. The fence needed a coat of paint. The vegetable garden Catherine had lovingly tended had long since become overrun with weeds, though he kept telling himself he would get to it. Beyond the fence, he could see Mrs. Kowalski's house, her kitchen light already on. The 76-year-old widow kept similar hours to his own, and sometimes Trevor wondered if she was as lonely as he was, or if she had simply made peace with solitude in a way he hadn't yet managed. The coffee finished brewing with a final hiss and gurgle. Trevor poured himself a cup in his favorite mug, a Father's Day gift from 3 years ago with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side. The letters were fading now, worn away by countless trips through the dishwasher. He took his coffee black, not because he preferred it that way, but because buying cream and sugar felt like an unnecessary expense when he could spend that money on things the kids needed. At 6:15, he heard the first stirrings from upstairs. Autumn was always the early riser, bouncing out of bed with an energy that Trevor could barely remember possessing. Her feet thundered down the stairs, and she appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing mismatched pajamas and her hair sticking up in every direction. "Morning." "Daddy," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Morning." "Sweetheart," Trevor replied, kissing the top of her head. She smelled like children's shampoo and sleep. "Sleep well." "I dreamed about dolphins," Autumn announced, releasing him and climbing onto one of the kitchen chairs. They were purple and could fly, and they sang songs that made flowers grow. "Sounds like a pretty good dream," Trevor said, setting a bowl of cereal in front of her. Bryson appeared 20 minutes later, moving slowly, his eyes half closed. He grunted something that might have been a greeting and slumped into his chair. Trevor didn't take it personally. The boy had never been a morning person. "Big math test today," Trevor reminded him gently. Bryson nodded, picking at his cereal without much interest. "I studied, I know you did. You're going to do great." After breakfast, the morning routine unfolded with choreographed precision. Backpacks were checked, lunches were packed, permission slips were signed. Trevor had become efficient at single parenthood out of necessity, though there were still days when he felt like he was barely keeping his head above water. At 7:45, they piled into his truck, a 15-year-old Ford that had nearly 200,000 miles on it, but still ran reliably. Trevor dropped Autumn at the elementary school first, watching until she disappeared into the building. Then he drove Bryson to the middle school, where his son offered a quick "see you later" before joining the stream of students heading inside. With the kids safely delivered, Trevor drove across town to his workshop. He had converted his garage into a carpentry business 5 years ago, back when Catherine was still healthy, and they had dreamed about him eventually quitting his construction job to work for himself full-time. That dream had come true, though not in the way they had imagined. When the medical bills started piling up, Trevor had taken the leap out of desperation rather than ambition. The workshop was his sanctuary. The smell of sawdust and wood stain, the feel of smooth pine or rough oak beneath his hands, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional from raw materials. This was where Trevor felt most like himself. The walls were lined with tools, some inherited from his father, others collected over years of work. In the corner sat his most prized possession, a wooden toolbox that Catherine had given him on their 10th anniversary. On the lid, Autumn had drawn a picture of their family when she was 5, stick figures holding hands, a yellow sun in the corner, everyone smiling. Trevor ran his hand over the drawing now. The pencil lines faded but still visible. Catherine's stick figure stood between him and the children, her round head topped with long hair. Autumn had insisted on drawing a crown on her mother's head because "Mommy is like a queen." The memory made Trevor's throat tighten. He shook his head, clearing away the emotion, and turned his attention to the day's work. He had 3 projects in various stages of completion: a dining table for the Hendersons, a bookshelf for old Mr. Peterson, and a custom cabinet for a new client. The work was steady if not lucrative. He made enough to cover the mortgage, keep food on the table, and chip away at the medical debt that still haunted him 3 years after Catherine's death. His business partner, Garrett, arrived around 9:30. Garrett was a decade younger than Trevor, all enthusiasm and optimism, with a talent for finishing work and an endless stream of terrible jokes. They had met on a construction site 7 years ago and had maintained an easy friendship despite their differences. "Morning, boss," Garrett called out, setting his tool bag down with a thud. "Ready to make some sawdust?" "That's the plan," Trevor replied. "How's Christine?" "Pregnant and craving pickles with ice cream," Garrett said, grinning. "I'm telling you, this baby is going to come out weird," Trevor laughed. "That's how it works. Wait until she starts craving combinations that shouldn't exist in nature." They fell into the comfortable rhythm of work, measuring and cutting, sanding and assembling. Garrett talked about the baby with a mixture of excitement and terror that Trevor remembered well. He offered advice when asked, keeping his responses practical and reassuring. What he didn't say was how much he envied Garrett's position, standing at the beginning of fatherhood with a partner by his side. Around noon, Mrs. Kowalski appeared at the workshop door carrying a covered dish. She did this once or twice a week, showing up with leftovers or baked goods, insisting that she had made too much. Trevor suspected she cooked specifically to bring him food, but he had learned not to argue. Mrs. Kowalski had been Catherine's friend first, helping her through the worst of the illness. After Catherine died, the older woman had quietly transferred that caretaking instinct to Trevor and the children. "Brought you some stew," she announced, setting the dish on his workbench. "And don't tell me you're not hungry." "You're too thin, Trevor Barnes." "You say that every time you see me," Trevor said, but the smell of beef and vegetables made his stomach growl. Because it's true every time, Mrs. Kowalski replied. She paused, then added carefully, "The church is having a charity fundraiser next month. Big fancy affair at the Riverside Hotel. They're looking for community members to attend. Support the cause?" Trevor kept his eyes on his lunch. "I'm not much for fancy affairs." "Catherine would want you to get out more," Mrs. Kowalski said gently. "She'd want you to have a life beyond work and the children." The mention of Catherine made Trevor set down his spoon. "I have a life. You have a routine," Mrs. Kowalski corrected. "There's a difference." She reached into her purse and pulled out an elegant cream-colored envelope. "I already bought you a ticket, non-refundable, so you might as well go." Trevor stared at the envelope. "Mrs. Kowalski, it's for the Children's Hospital," she interrupted. "The place that took such good care of Catherine. Don't you think that's a worthy cause?" That was a low blow, and they both knew it. Trevor took the envelope with a resigned sigh. "You play dirty. I play to win," Mrs. Kowalski said, patting his arm. "Wear something nice, and maybe smile once or twice. It won't kill you." After she left, Trevor opened the envelope and examined the invitation. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, date and time printed in elegant script. The fundraiser was in 3 weeks. The Children's Hospital had been kind to Catherine in those final months. If buying a ticket and suffering through one uncomfortable evening helped support that work, then Trevor could manage it. He tucked the invitation into his toolbox, next to the drawing his daughter had made. Catherine's stick-figure face seemed to smile up at him, and for a moment Trevor could almost hear her voice. "Go to the party, Trevor. You might even have fun." He doubted that, but he would go, for her. For the hospital. That evening, after picking up the kids and making dinner, Trevor sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills. The medical debt loomed largest, a number so large it felt almost abstract. He paid what he could each month, chipping away at it slowly, knowing it would take years to clear. At 8 o'clock, he tucked Autumn into bed, reading her 2 chapters from their current book. At 9, he checked on Bryson, who was already half asleep with his book lying open on his chest. Trevor removed the book, turned off the light, and pulled the door mostly closed. Finally alone, Trevor stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark backyard. He thought about the invitation, about the fundraiser he had agreed to attend. The prospect filled him with something close to dread, but he would go. He had given his word, and Trevor Barnes was a man who kept his promises. This was his life, predictable, manageable, safe. He had built it carefully from the ruins of his grief, constructing routines and boundaries that kept him and his children afloat. It wasn't exciting, but it was enough, or at least, and that's what Trevor told himself as he lay in the dark, trying not to think about how lonely he felt or how much longer he could keep pretending that simply surviving was the same as living. 3 weeks passed faster than Trevor would have liked. The night of the charity fundraiser arrived with the inevitability of a dental appointment he had been dreading. He stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 4th time, feeling like an imposter playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. The suit was his only one, purchased 8 years ago for Catherine's cousin's wedding. It still fit, more or less, though the jacket felt tight across his shoulders from years of physical labor. He had polished his dress shoes until they gleamed, but they pinched his feet in ways his work boots never did. His hair, still damp from the shower, refused to cooperate despite his best efforts with a comb. "You look nice, Daddy," Autumn said from the doorway. She was already in her pajamas, having been bathed and fed by Mrs. Kowalski, who had agreed to stay with the children for the evening. "Thanks, sweetheart," Trevor said, though he felt anything but nice. He felt awkward and uncomfortable, like a carpenter forced into a business meeting. "Are you going on a date?" Autumn asked with the innocent curiosity of an 8-year-old. "No, just a charity event." "Raising money for the hospital, the one where Mommy was?" Trevor's throat tightened. "Yes, that one." Autumn considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Mommy would like that, out of the mouths of children." Trevor kissed her forehead. "You be good for Mrs. Kowalski." "I'm always good," Autumn said with complete sincerity, making Trevor smile despite his nerves. The Riverside Hotel was on the expensive side of town, where the streets were lined with old-growth trees and the buildings had actual architectural character. Trevor's truck looked comically out of place in the parking lot among the sleek sedans and luxury vehicles. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment, seriously considering turning around and going home. He could say he got sick, Mrs. Kowalski would understand, but no, he had made a promise. Trevor Barnes kept his promises. The hotel lobby was all marble and crystal, with lighting that seemed designed to make everything look golden and expensive. A sign near the elevators directed guests to the grand ballroom on the 3rd floor. Trevor followed a well-dressed couple toward the elevators, feeling increasingly certain this had been a terrible mistake. The grand ballroom lived up to its name. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling, painted with ornate designs. Round tables covered in white linens filled the space, each set with china and glassware that probably cost more than Trevor's monthly grocery budget. A small orchestra played classical music from a raised platform at one end of the room. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns mingled, holding champagne flutes and laughing at jokes Trevor would never hear. He accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter. Champagne at these events was never free, and found his assigned table near the back. Better to be inconspicuous. He could sit through dinner, applaud politely during the speeches, write a modest additional check if his conscience demanded it, and leave without embarrassing himself. That was the plan. Anyway, 20 minutes into awkward small talk with his table-mates, a retired banker and his wife, both pleasant enough but clearly from a different world, Trevor excused himself to find the restroom. He needed a moment to breathe, to remind himself he only had to endure another 2 hours of this. The hallway outside the ballroom was blessedly quiet. Trevor walked past the restrooms, drawn by the promise of a window at the far end that looked out over the city. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the lights below and thinking about his kids. Probably watching a movie with Mrs. Kowalski right now. Safe and happy and unaware of how much their father felt like a fish out of water. Not much of a party person either. Trevor turned, startled. A woman stood a few feet away, holding a champagne flute, and regarding him with an expression that might have been amusement. She was striking in a way that made Trevor's brain momentarily stop working. Tall, elegant, wearing a dark blue dress that probably cost more than his truck payment. Her hair was pulled back from her face, highlighting sharp cheekbones and intelligent brown eyes. There was something almost intimidating about her composed beauty. Sorry. Trevor managed, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "The party," she said, gesturing back toward the ballroom with her glass. "You have that look of someone who would rather be anywhere else. Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone wearing the same look," she said with a slight smile. She moved to stand beside him at the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "These events are necessary but exhausting. Everyone performing their roles, saying the right things, writing the right checks." Trevor nodded, unsure how to respond. Up close, she was even more beautiful, and he found himself suddenly, acutely aware of his ill-fitting suit and scuffed shoes. "I'm Sienna," she said, extending her hand. "Trevor." He shook her hand, noting the firm, confident grip. "Trevor Barnes. What brings you here tonight, Trevor Barnes?" "Guilt, mostly," he answered honestly. "A friend bought me a ticket and insisted I attend. The hospital being honored tonight. They took good care of my wife before she passed." Sienna's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." 3 years ago, Trevor said, then wondered why he was sharing this with a complete stranger. "I have 2 kids. We're doing okay. That must be difficult. Managing everything alone. You do what you have to do." Trevor shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "What about you? What brings you here?" "Obligation," Sienna said. "My company is one of the sponsors. I'm expected to make an appearance, smile appropriately, and demonstrate corporate social responsibility. That sounds cynical, does it?" Sienna considered this. "Perhaps, though the cynicism comes from the performance aspect, not the cause itself. The hospital does important work. I'm happy to support it. I just wish it didn't require quite so much." She waved her hand vaguely. "Theater." Trevor found himself smiling. "I know exactly what you mean. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city lights. Trevor tried to think of something clever to say, something that would keep this conversation going, but his mind had gone blank. She was beautiful and successful, and clearly out of his league in every measurable way. What did a carpenter have to say to someone like her? "Your dress is very nice," he finally offered, immediately wanting to kick himself. Nice? That was the best he could do? "Thank you," Sienna said, though there was a new spark of amusement in her eyes. Trevor's brain, desperate to fill the silence, kept talking before he could stop it. The color suits you. And the way it fits is—" He made a vague gesture that was supposed to indicate elegance, but instead drew attention to her figure. "Your breasts are big." The words hung in the air like a grenade, with the pin pulled. Trevor's face went from normal to crimson in approximately half a second. His mind, which had been unhelpfully supplying words moments ago, now offered only a screaming void of horror. Had he actually just said that out loud? To a complete stranger at a charity event? "I meant—" he started, but there was no recovery from this, none. "That came out wrong. I was trying to say the dress, not I didn't mean to comment on your—" He was drowning, flailing, desperate for the floor to open and swallow him whole. This was worse than any nightmare he had ever had. This was the sort of story people told about spectacularly awful moments, the kind that made listeners wince in sympathetic embarrassment. Sienna regarded him with an expression Trevor couldn't quite read. He braced himself for the slap, the furious tirade, the security guards being summoned to remove the creep who sexually harassed guests in the hallway. Instead, she took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving his face. When she lowered the glass, there was the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well," she said, her voice calm and measured, "I suppose I should be flattered you noticed. Most men at these events are too busy trying to impress me with their portfolios to actually look at me." She paused, letting Trevor's mortification reach its absolute peak. But for future reference, there are more subtle ways to express admiration. Trevor wanted to die, actually cease existing, evaporate into mist. "I'm so sorry," he managed. "That was completely inappropriate and disrespectful, and I have no excuse, except that apparently my brain stopped working and my mouth just kept going and—" "Trevor," Sienna interrupted gently. He stopped talking, his face still burning. "Breathe," she instructed. "You look like you're about to have a heart attack." Trevor took a shaky breath, then another. His hands were trembling. He had never been so mortified in his entire life. Sienna reached into her small evening bag and pulled out a business card. She held it out to him. "Call me," she said simply. Trevor stared at the card like it might be a trick. "I don't understand." "You're honest," Sienna said. "Painfully, embarrassingly honest. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" She pressed the card into his hand. "Call me, we'll have coffee. You can apologize properly, and I'll decide whether to forgive you. I don't—" "Why would you?" "Because you're interesting," Sienna said. She finished her champagne and set the glass on a nearby table. "And because I suspect you're a good man who just had a very bad moment. Everyone deserves a second chance." She glanced back toward the ballroom. "I should return before I'm missed." "Think about it, Trevor Barnes." She walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving Trevor standing alone in the hallway, holding her business card and trying to process what had just happened. He looked down at the card. Embossed lettering, heavy stock. Sienna Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Enterprises. A phone number. An email address. Trevor stood there for a long time, his embarrassment gradually giving way to confusion, then to something that might have been hope. She had given him her card. She had told him to call. Despite everything, despite his spectacular, mortifying failure at normal human interaction, she wanted to hear from him again. He tucked the card carefully into his jacket pocket and returned to the ballroom, his mind spinning. He barely remembered the rest of the evening, the speeches and the dinner and the polite applause. All he could think about was Sienna's calm smile, her unexpected grace, and the business card that felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. What kind of woman responds to that kind of comment with an invitation to coffee? Trevor had no idea. But for the first time in 3 years, he found himself genuinely curious about someone, genuinely interested in what might happen next. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The business card sat on Trevor's kitchen counter for 3 days, propped against the coffee maker, where he would see it every morning. Sienna Caldwell, CEO. The embossed letters seemed to mock him with their elegance and authority. Every time he looked at it, his face heated with the memory of what he had said, how spectacularly he had humiliated himself. "Call me," she had said. As if it were that simple, Trevor picked up the card for the 100th time, turning it over in his calloused fingers. The back was blank, pristine white cardstock that probably cost more per square inch than his breakfast cereal. What did a carpenter say to a CEO? What did a single dad from the working-class side of town say to a woman who ran an entire company and wore dresses that cost more than his monthly mortgage? "You're going to wear the ink off that thing if you keep staring at it," Garrett said from across the workshop. They were working on the Henderson dining table, but Trevor had been distracted all morning, pulling out the card every few minutes like a nervous tick. "I'm not staring at it," Trevor protested, setting the card down on his workbench. "Right, and I'm not watching you stare at it." Garrett wiped sawdust from his hands and walked over, picking up the card before Trevor could stop him. "Sienna Caldwell, CEO. Fancy. Where'd you get this?" "The fundraiser," Trevor admitted. "I met her there?" Garrett's eyebrows rose. "You met a CEO? And she gave you her card?" He flipped it over, examining both sides. "Personal card, too, not just business contact. What did you do? Charm her with your winning personality?" "Something like that," Trevor muttered. "So why haven't you called her?" Trevor took the card back, returning it to his pocket. "Because it's complicated. It's a phone call, not brain surgery. You don't understand? Then explain it to me." Garrett leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "Because from where I'm standing, a beautiful woman gave you her number and told you to call. And you're acting like it's a death sentence." Trevor was quiet for a long moment, running his hand over the smooth wood of the table they were building. "I made a fool of myself," he finally said. Said something completely inappropriate. The kind of thing that should have ended with security escorting me out. But it didn't. No, she just... Trevor shook his head, still not quite believing it himself. "She smiled and gave me her card and told me to call." Garrett whistled low. "She must have one hell of a sense of humor. Or she actually likes you. Why would someone like her like someone like me? Why wouldn't she?" Garrett countered. "You're a good guy, Trevor. Hard-working, honest, great dad. Maybe she's tired of all those slick corporate types and wants someone real." Trevor wanted to believe that, but the gap between their worlds felt too wide. "I wouldn't know what to say to her." "Start with hello," Garrett suggested. "Then maybe I'm sorry for being an idiot. Women appreciate apologies. After that, just be yourself. Being myself is what got me into this mess, and being yourself is what made her give you her number." Garrett clapped him on the shoulder. "Look, you can stand here overthinking this for another week, or you can make the call. What's the worst that could happen? She could laugh at me, tell me she was just being polite. Or she could say yes to coffee, and you might actually enjoy yourself for once." Garrett returned to his work. "But you'll never know if you don't try." That evening, after the kids were in bed, Trevor sat at his kitchen table with his phone and Sienna's card. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the walls. He had already rehearsed what he would say, had written down bullet points on a scrap of paper like he was preparing for a business presentation. He dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe she had already forgotten about him. The awkward carpenter who had said something mortifying, and "This is Sienna." Her voice was exactly as he remembered, calm, professional, with an undertone of warmth. Trevor's prepared speech evaporated from his mind. "Hi," he managed. "This is Trevor Barnes from the fundraiser. I'm the one who..." He couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. "I remember," Sienna said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I was wondering if you would call. I'm sorry it took a few days." I wasn't sure if you were serious. I'm always serious about coffee invitations, Sienna said. Are you free this week? Trevor's heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it through the phone. I could do Saturday morning. I have to drop my kids at their activities first, but after that I'm free. Saturday works. Do you know Bennett's Cafe on Maple Street? I can find it. 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock, Trevor confirmed, already making a mental note to look up the cafe and figure out what to wear. Did people dress up for coffee? Was this a date or just a friendly meeting? He had no idea. I'm looking forward to it, Sienna said. And Trevor? Yes? Try not to spend the next 3 days worrying about it. I don't bite, Trevor laughed despite himself. I'll do my best. After they hung up, he sat at the table for a long time, staring at his phone and trying to process what had just happened. He had a coffee date with Sienna Caldwell, the woman he had completely embarrassed himself in front of, who had somehow found that charming enough to want to see him again. Daddy? Trevor looked up to find Autumn standing in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. What are you doing up, sweetheart? I heard you talking. She climbed into his lap, fitting against him the way she had since she was a toddler. Were you talking to the lady from the party? Trevor should have known better than to think he had any secrets from his daughter. Yes, we're going to have coffee on Saturday. Autumn was quiet for a moment, processing this. Do you like her? I don't really know her yet, Trevor said honestly. But I'd like to. Is she nice? She seems to be. Another pause. Would Mommy be okay with it? The question hit Trevor square in the chest. He tightened his arms around his daughter, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I think Mommy would want me to be happy, he said carefully. And she would want you and your brother to be happy too. But that doesn't mean we forget about her or love her any less. Autumn nodded against his chest. Mrs. Kowalski says Mommy is always with us, even if we can't see her. Mrs. Kowalski is right. Okay. Autumn yawned, already half asleep. I hope the coffee lady is nice to you. Trevor carried her back to bed, tucking her in and kissing her forehead. When he returned to the kitchen, he picked up Sienna's business card one more time, running his thumb over the embossed letters. Saturday, coffee, a chance to apologize properly and maybe, just maybe, discover if there was something real beneath the awkward first impression. The thought terrified him. But it also made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. Not dread, not obligation, but genuine curiosity about what might happen next. Trevor placed the card in his wallet where it would be safe and headed upstairs to bed. He had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to worry. 3 days to convince himself this was either the best idea he'd ever had or the worst. Probably both. But Garrett was right about one thing. He would never know unless he tried. And for the first time since Catherine died, Trevor found himself willing to try, willing to step outside the comfortable, predictable routine he had built and see what else life might offer. It was terrifying. But as he lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, Trevor realized he was also smiling. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Trevor dropped Bryson at basketball practice and Autumn at her art class, then drove across town to Bennett's Cafe with his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. He had changed his shirt 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple blue button-down that Garrett had once told him brought out his eyes. Not that Trevor put much stock in such things, but he needed all the help he could get. His jeans were his newest pair, which meant they were only 2 years old instead of 5. He had even trimmed his beard, though his hands had been shaking so badly he'd nearly taken off more than he intended. Bennett's Cafe was the kind of place Trevor would never have discovered on his own. Small, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, with bistro tables on the sidewalk and the smell of fresh-baked pastries wafting through the open door. It was charming in an effortless way that made Trevor feel immediately out of place. He arrived 10 minutes early and considered waiting in his truck, but that seemed cowardly. Instead, he went inside and ordered a black coffee, then claimed a table by the window where he could watch the street. His coffee grew cold as he waited, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Sienna arrived exactly at 10 o'clock. Trevor saw her through the window first, walking down the sidewalk with the same confident grace she had displayed at the fundraiser. Today she wore jeans, expensive-looking ones, but jeans nonetheless, and a cream-colored sweater that looked impossibly soft. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked more approachable than she had in her evening gown, but no less beautiful. Trevor stood as she entered, nearly knocking over his cold coffee in the process. "Hello, Trevor," Sienna said, and her smile seemed genuine, warm even. "Have you been waiting long?" "Just a few minutes," he lied. "Can I get you something?" "I'll order." "Please, sit." She returned a few minutes later with a cappuccino and a croissant, settling into the chair across from him with an ease that Trevor envied. He felt like every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to flee at the first sign of disaster. "So," Sienna said, wrapping her hands around her cup, "how have you been since the fundraiser?" "Mortified mostly," Trevor admitted. "I've replayed that conversation approximately 800 times, and it gets worse each time." Sienna laughed, a real laugh, not the polite titter he had heard at the fundraiser. "I appreciate your honesty. Though I suspect you're being too hard on yourself." I said something completely inappropriate to a stranger. "I don't think I'm being hard enough on myself." "You made an awkward mistake," Sienna corrected gently. "There's a difference between that and being deliberately offensive. I could tell you were horrified the moment the words left your mouth." Trevor rubbed his face, still feeling the heat of embarrassment. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," Sienna agreed. "But it does make it forgivable." She took a sip of her cappuccino, watching him over the rim. "Tell me about yourself, Trevor Barnes. What do you do when you're not attending charity fundraisers and accidentally insulting women?" The change of subject was a relief. "I'm a carpenter. Have my own small business, work mostly on custom furniture and home renovations. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." "There's nothing wrong with honest work," Sienna said. "In fact, I'd argue it's becoming increasingly rare. What made you choose carpentry?" Trevor relaxed slightly, finding his footing in familiar territory. "My father was a carpenter. Taught me the trade when I was young. There's something satisfying about working with your hands, creating something that will last. Taking raw wood and turning it into something beautiful and functional. I never get tired of it." "That sounds wonderful. Do you have pictures of your work?" Trevor pulled out his phone, showing her photos of recent projects. The dining table, a bookshelf, a custom cabinet with intricate joinery. Sienna leaned forward, genuinely interested, asking questions about techniques and wood selection. Her attention made Trevor more animated than he had been in months, explaining the difference between hardwoods, demonstrating with hand gestures how certain joints fit together. "You love it," Sienna observed. "I can hear it in your voice." "I do," Trevor admitted. "It's one of the few things that make sense to me. You put in the work, you get results. No politics, no games. Just skill and effort." "I envy that clarity," Sienna said, something wistful crossing her face. "My world is all politics and games." "What is it you do exactly?" "The card just says CEO, Caldwell Enterprises. We do commercial real estate development. I inherited the company from my late husband 5 years ago. Inherited the debt too, actually. Spent the last few years turning it around, making it profitable again." She paused. "It's been exhausting and rewarding in equal measure." The mention of her late husband shifted something in the conversation. Trevor set down his coffee. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you had lost someone too." "How would you know?" "I don't exactly lead with that information." Sienna's expression softened. "But yes, car accident 5 years ago. He was 43. We had been married for 12 years. My wife was 38 when she passed," Trevor said quietly. "Cancer. We fought it for 2 years, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to, children?" Sienna asked gently. "2. Autumn is 8, Bryson is 11. They're the reason I get up every morning, the reason I keep going when everything feels too hard. That must be incredibly difficult, raising them alone." Trevor shrugged. "You do what you have to do. They needed a parent who was present, not someone drowning in grief. So I learned to be present. Most days, anyway. Sienna reached across the table, her hand resting near his but not quite touching. For what it's worth, I think you're doing something extraordinary. Building a business, raising 2 children, keeping everything together after loss. That takes real strength. I don't feel strong. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's what strength looks like, Sienna said. It's not about never struggling. It's about getting up every day and trying anyway. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Trevor had expected this coffee meeting to be awkward, full of small talk and surface-level pleasantries. Instead, they had somehow arrived at something deeper, more honest. "Can I ask you something?" Trevor said. "Of course. Why did you give me your card? After what I said, you had every right to walk away and never think about me again." Sienna considered the question, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Because you were real," she finally said. "Everyone at those events is performing, saying what they think they should say, being who they think they should be. You were just yourself, awkward and honest and mortified. It was refreshing. Most people wouldn't find mortification refreshing. Most people haven't spent the last 5 years surrounded by people who want something from them," Sienna said. "Money, connections, access. You didn't even know who I was. You weren't trying to impress me or use me. You were just a nervous man who said something stupid and immediately regretted it. That kind of authenticity is rare in my world." Trevor absorbed this, not quite sure what to make of it. "I'm not sure authenticity is worth much when it comes wrapped in inappropriate comments." Sienna laughed again, and Trevor found himself smiling despite his embarrassment. "Fair point. But I'm willing to overlook the delivery if the intentions were good." "They were," Trevor assured her. "Terrible execution, but good intentions. Then we'll consider it forgiven." Sienna pulled a napkin toward her and borrowed a pen from her purse, writing something down. She slid the napkin across to him. "This is my personal cell phone, not the business line on the card. If you'd like to do this again, coffee, conversation, no fundraisers required, call me." Trevor looked at the number written in neat, precise handwriting. "You're sure? Because I don't want you to feel obligated." "Trevor," Sienna interrupted gently, "I don't do things out of obligation. If I didn't want to see you again, I wouldn't have answered when you called the first time." "Okay," Trevor said, carefully folding the napkin and putting it in his wallet. "I'd like that. To see you again, I mean." "Good." Sienna glanced at her watch. "I hate to cut this short, but I have a meeting at 11. Corporate social responsibility waits for no one." They walked out together, pausing on the sidewalk. The morning sun caught in Sienna's hair, and Trevor thought again how beautiful she was, how far outside his usual world. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, "and for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for calling," Sienna replied. "It took courage, I imagine." "Terrifying courage," Trevor admitted. "The best kind." Sienna touched his arm briefly, a gesture of warmth that made Trevor's heart skip. "I'll wait to hear from you." She walked away, and Trevor stood on the sidewalk watching her go, the napkin with her number feeling like a precious secret in his wallet. He had gone into this meeting expecting disaster, bracing himself for polite rejection or worse, pity. Instead, he had found connection, understanding, the possibility of something he hadn't even known he was looking for. As he drove to pick up his kids, Trevor found himself already thinking about when he could call her again, what they might talk about next. The future, which had felt so fixed and predictable just a week ago, suddenly seemed full of unexpected possibilities, and for the first time in 3 years, that didn't terrify him quite as much as it excited him. 3 weeks had passed since that first coffee meeting, and in that time, Trevor and Sienna had fallen into an easy rhythm. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch turned into dinner, and somewhere along the way, Trevor stopped feeling quite so much like he was impersonating someone who knew how to date. They talked on the phone most evenings after Trevor's kids went to bed. Conversations that stretched long into the night about everything and nothing, her frustrations with difficult clients, his pride in Bryson's improving grades, shared memories of their late spouses that no longer felt quite so painful to speak aloud. It felt natural, comfortable. Right, which was exactly why. Trevor should have known something would complicate it. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered to his workshop by courier. Heavy cream stock, formal lettering. Sienna Caldwell requests the pleasure of your company at the Caldwell Enterprises annual gala. Black tie, optional. Trevor stared at it for a long moment before calling her. "You sent me a formal invitation?" he asked when she answered. "I did," Sienna confirmed, sounding amused. "I wanted to make sure you had plenty of notice. These things require planning. Sienna, I can't. This is your company event. I'd be completely out of place." "You'll be my guest," she said simply. "And I'd very much like you to be there. But if you're uncomfortable, I understand." Trevor looked around his workshop, at the sawdust on his clothes and the calluses on his hands. The gap between his world and hers had never felt wider. What would people think? Your employees, your colleagues. "I don't particularly care what they think," Sienna said, though her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "But I care what you think. If this is too much too soon, just tell me." Trevor heard the unspoken question beneath her words. Was he embarrassed to be seen with her? Ashamed of what they were building together? The answer was complicated. Not embarrassed of her, never that, but embarrassed of himself, of how he would look standing next to her in her world. "I'll go," he said, making the decision before he could overthink it. "But I'm warning you now, I'm going to feel like a fraud the entire time." "Then we'll feel like frauds together," Sienna said warmly. "I'll send you the details." The night of the gala arrived with Trevor's anxiety at an all-time high. He had rented a proper tuxedo this time, unwilling to embarrass Sienna with his ill-fitting suit. Garrett had helped him with the bow tie, insisting that clip-ons were unacceptable and teaching him how to tie it properly while offering a running commentary about Trevor's lack of formal wear knowledge. The event was being held at the Grandview Hotel, even more upscale than the Riverside. Trevor's truck looked absurd in the valet line behind sleek European cars and luxury sedans. The young valet who took his keys tried to hide his surprise. But Trevor saw it anyway, the quick assessment, the barely concealed judgment. He was already regretting this. The ballroom was magnificent in a way that made the charity fundraiser look modest. Ice sculptures, elaborate floral arrangements, a full orchestra, and what had to be 300 people in evening wear that probably cost more than Trevor made in a month. He accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, more for something to hold than any desire to drink, and tried to spot Sienna in the crowd. "Trevor!" She appeared at his side, stunning, in a floor-length silver gown that caught the light with every movement. Her smile was genuine, warm, and for a moment Trevor forgot his anxiety entirely. "You look beautiful," he said. "You clean up well yourself," Sienna replied, adjusting his bow tie with an intimacy that made Trevor's heart race. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." The next hour was a blur of names and faces, of firm handshakes and polite conversation. Sienna kept him close, her hand occasionally touching his arm or the small of his back, grounding him. But Trevor couldn't help noticing the looks they received, the curious glances, the whispered conversations behind raised hands. "That's Trevor Barnes," he overheard one well-dressed man say to another near the bar. "Sienna's carpenter boyfriend. Can you imagine?" The other man chuckled. "Quite the step down from Richard, wouldn't you say? Though I suppose she wants someone she can control this time." Trevor's face burned. He set down his champagne and walked quickly toward the exit, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but here, where he was so obviously out of place. He made it to the terrace before Sienna caught up with him. "Trevor, wait, I heard them," he said, not turning around. "The men at the bar. And they're not wrong, are they? I must step down. A carpenter crashing a CEO's party. Those men are idiots," Sienna said firmly. "And their opinions mean nothing to me. But they're your colleagues, your peers. This is your world, Sienna, and I don't belong in it." Trevor finally turned to face her. "Look at me. I rent a tuxedo once a year and feel like I'm playing dress-up. You wear gowns that cost more than my mortgage payment, like they're everyday clothes. We're from different planets. We're from different backgrounds," Sienna corrected. "That's not the same thing, isn't it? Because right now it feels exactly the same. Trevor ran his hand through his hair, frustration making his voice sharper than he intended. Why are you even with someone like me? You could have anyone. Someone who knows which fork to use at dinner. Someone who doesn't have to look up what black tie optional means. Sienna's expression hardened slightly. Is that really what you think? That I'm with you because I can't do better? I think you're with me because I'm safe, Trevor said. Because I'm so far removed from your usual world that I can't hurt you the way Richard's death hurt you. I'm convenient. The words hung between them, harsh and cutting. Sienna's face went pale, then flushed with anger. How dare you, she said quietly. How dare you tell me why I'm with you, as if I don't know my own mind? Then tell me, Trevor challenged. Tell me why a millionaire businesswoman wants anything to do with a working-class single dad who can barely make ends meet. Because you're real. Sienna's voice rose, drawing glances from guests who had wandered onto the terrace. She lowered it again, stepping closer. Because when you talk to me, you see me, not my company or my money or what I can do for you. Because you make me laugh. Because you're a good father and a skilled craftsman, and you're honest even when it's uncomfortable. Because being with you feels like coming home after years of living in a hotel. Trevor shook his head. That's not enough. Not when every person in that ballroom is looking at us and thinking the same thing. What is she doing with him? I don't care what they think. Well, I do. Trevor's voice cracked. Because I'm the one who has to stand there and be judged, be found wanting, be the charity case on your arm. Sienna stepped back as if he had slapped her. Is that what you think you are? A charity case? Trevor wanted to take the words back the moment they left his mouth, but it was too late. The damage was done. He could see it in her eyes, the hurt and disappointment. Maybe this was a mistake, Sienna said softly. Maybe we were fooling ourselves thinking we could bridge this gap. Maybe we were, Trevor agreed. His heart breaking even as he said it. They stood in silence, the sounds of the party drifting out from the ballroom, laughter and music, and the tinkling of glasses. All the markers of a world Trevor didn't belong to, had never belonged to, and probably never would. I should go, he finally said. Sienna nodded, not meeting his eyes. I'll have the valet bring your truck around. Sienna, please don't, she interrupted. Not right now. Trevor left, walking through the hotel lobby and out into the cool night air. The valet brought his truck, still looking absurd among the luxury cars, and Trevor drove home in silence, his rented tuxedo feeling like a costume he couldn't wait to take off. When he got home, Mrs. Kowalski was asleep on his couch, the children safely tucked into their beds. He paid her, thanked her, and sat alone in his kitchen after she left, still wearing the tuxedo. Feeling like the biggest fool in the world, he had sabotaged something good because he couldn't get past his own insecurities. He had pushed away a woman who cared about him because he was too proud to accept that someone from her world might genuinely want someone from his. Trevor pulled out his phone. Looking at the picture, Sienna had texted him last week. The two of them at a diner, her laughing at something he had said, both of them looking genuinely happy. He had shown it to Bryson, who had studied it carefully before pronouncing, "She seems nice, Dad. Mom would like her." But Trevor had ruined it, because he was too insecure, too proud, too convinced that he didn't deserve happiness with someone like Sienna. The phone buzzed in his hand. A text from Sienna. "I'm sorry. I pushed too hard, too fast. You were right. We're from different worlds." Maybe that's too much to overcome. Trevor stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He wanted to call her, to apologize, to explain that he had been an idiot. But what would he say? That he was sorry for telling the truth. That he was sorry for being exactly who he was, a working-class carpenter who would never fit into her world. He set the phone down without responding and went upstairs to change out of the tuxedo. Tomorrow, he would return it to the rental shop and go back to his normal life, the workshop, the kids, the comfortable routines that kept him safe. But as he lay in bed that night, all Trevor could think about was Sienna's hurt expression, her anger and disappointment, and the terrible certainty that he had just thrown away the first real happiness he'd felt in 3 years. all because he was too afraid to believe he deserved it. A week passed in heavy silence. Trevor threw himself into work with an intensity that worried Garrett, sanding wood until his arms ached and staying in the workshop long after he should have gone home. The napkin with Sienna's personal number remained in his wallet, but he couldn't bring himself to look at it. The kids noticed his mood, though they approached it differently. Autumn asked direct questions. "Are you sad, Daddy? Did you and Miss Sienna have a fight?" While Bryson simply stayed closer than usual, offering quiet companionship without demanding explanations. On Saturday morning, Trevor was working on a bookshelf when his phone rang. For a moment his heart leaped, hoping it was Sienna. Instead, it was Mrs. Kowalski. "You need to come over," she said without preamble. "I have something to show you." 20 minutes later, Trevor sat in Mrs. Kowalski's living room, holding a cup of tea he hadn't asked for, while the older woman bustled around looking for something. "Ah, here it is," she said, returning with a worn photo album. She sat beside him and opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. "That's my Harold and me, 45 years ago." Trevor looked at the photograph. A young Mrs. Kowalski stood next to a broad-shouldered man in work clothes, both smiling at the camera. They looked happy, comfortable together. "He was a factory worker," Mrs. Kowalski said. "I was a schoolteacher. My parents thought I was marrying beneath myself. Said I should wait for a professional man, someone with better prospects." Trevor looked up at her. "What did you do?" "I married him anyway," Mrs. Kowalski said simply, "because I loved him, and because what other people thought didn't matter as much as what we had together. 45 years we had before the cancer took him. 45 good years, Trevor. Not perfect, not easy, but good." Trevor set down his tea. "This is about Sienna. Of course it's about Sienna. You've been moping around like someone died." Mrs. Kowalski closed the album. "Catherine wouldn't want this for you. She'd want you to be happy. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You care about this woman. She cares about you. The rest is just noise." Trevor stood and walked to the window. "You don't understand. We're from completely different worlds. She's wealthy, successful, runs a whole company. I'm a carpenter who can barely pay his bills. And she knows all of that and chose you anyway," Mrs. Kowalski said. "So the real question is, why can't you choose her?" Trevor didn't have an answer for that. That afternoon, he picked up Autumn from her friend's house and drove home in contemplative silence. As they pulled into the driveway, Autumn said, "Can we invite Miss Sienna over for dinner sometime?" Trevor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We're not seeing each other anymore, sweetheart. Why not?" "It's complicated. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain things," Autumn observed with 8-year-old wisdom. "Did you have a fight?" "Sort of. You should apologize." "That's what you always tell us to do when we fight with our friends." Trevor smiled despite himself. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Autumn unbuckled her seatbelt. "Bryson says you probably messed it up because you're afraid of being happy again. He says you feel guilty about Mommy." Trevor turned to look at his daughter. "Bryson said that?" "He talks to me sometimes. About grown-up stuff." Autumn opened her door. "I think he's right. I think you're scared. But Daddy, Mommy wouldn't want you to be scared. She'd want you to be happy." After Autumn went inside, Trevor sat in the truck for a long moment. Out of the mouths of children. Both of his kids had seen what he'd been too stubborn to admit, that he was sabotaging his own happiness out of guilt and fear. That evening, after the children were in bed, Trevor sat at his kitchen table and pulled out his wallet. He removed the napkin with Sienna's number and unfolded it carefully. The ink had started to fade slightly from being carried around for weeks, but the numbers were still clear. Next to it, he placed his wedding ring, Catherine's ring, which he kept in a drawer upstairs. He had taken it off 2 years ago when he finally accepted she wasn't coming back, but he had never been able to let it go entirely. Trevor looked at both items, the napkin representing his future, the ring representing his past. For the first time, he understood that honoring Catherine's memory didn't mean staying frozen in grief. It meant living the kind of full, loving life she would have wanted for him. He picked up his phone and started typing a text to Sienna, then stopped. This wasn't something he could say in a message. This required courage. The kind of courage Catherine had shown fighting her illness. The kind of courage his children showed every day, adapting to life without their mother. Sunday afternoon found Trevor standing outside Sienna's house, his heart pounding. It was a beautiful home in an expensive neighborhood, exactly what he would have expected. He had driven past it twice before finally parking and walking to the door. He rang the bell before he could lose his nervous. Sienna answered wearing casual clothes, jeans and a sweater, and her expression, when she saw him, was carefully neutral. "Trevor, I'm an idiot," he said without preamble. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." Her living room was elegant but warm, with comfortable furniture and family photos on the mantel. Trevor noticed one picture in particular, a younger Sienna with a handsome man, both smiling. "Richard, presumably, what did you want to talk about?" Sienna asked, not sitting, not inviting him to sit. Trevor took a deep breath. "I was wrong. At the gala, I was wrong about everything. I projected my own insecurities onto you, assumed you were with me for reasons that made sense to me, rather than trusting what you told me. And I'm sorry." Sienna's expression softened slightly, but she didn't speak. "The truth is," Trevor continued, "I'm terrified. Terrified that I'm not good enough for you, that I'll embarrass you, that this won't work. But I'm more terrified of losing what we have, because I'm too proud to try." He paused. "My daughter told me I'm scared of being happy again. She's 8 years old, and she figured out what took me weeks to understand." "What did you understand?" Sienna asked quietly. "That loving you doesn't mean I loved Catherine any less. That moving forward isn't betraying the past. And that you deserve someone who's brave enough to meet you halfway, instead of running away when things get difficult." Sienna was quiet for a long moment. "You hurt me," she finally said. "At the gala. The things you said, I know, and I'm sorry. I don't need you to fit into my world, Trevor. I need you to let me into yours." She crossed her arms. "I need you to trust that when I say I care about you, I mean it. Not because you're safe or convenient, but because of who you are." "I do trust you," Trevor said. "I just don't trust myself. But I'm willing to work on that if you'll give me another chance." Sienna studied him, and Trevor saw the moment her decision shifted. "One chance," she said. "And this time, when you feel insecure or out of place, you talk to me instead of assuming the worst." "Deal," Trevor said, relief flooding through him. "Good." Sienna moved closer. "Because I've missed you. And I'm tired of pretending I don't care whether we work this out." Trevor reached for her hand. "I've missed you too." They stood there, holding hands in her elegant living room, and for the first time since the gala, Trevor felt like they might actually have a chance. 2 months passed, in a kind of cautious happiness. Trevor and Sienna rebuilt their relationship on more honest foundations, learning to navigate their different worlds with patience and humor. Sienna came to his workshop and watched him work, asking questions about joinery and wood grain. Trevor attended smaller gatherings with her colleagues, gradually becoming more comfortable in situations that once terrified him. The children warmed to Sienna as well. Autumn adored her immediately, showing off her artwork and chattering endlessly about school. Bryson remained more reserved but polite, watching carefully to see if this woman would hurt his father or prove herself trustworthy. It was Bryson who inadvertently changed everything. Trevor was in his workshop on a Wednesday afternoon when his phone rang. The school calling during class hours was never good news. He answered immediately. "Mr. Barnes, this is Principal Whitmore. Bryson is fine, but I need you to come to the school. There's been an incident." 20 minutes later, Trevor sat in the principal's office while Bryson slumped in the chair beside him, his knuckles scraped and his shirt torn. The other boy, an 8th grader named Tyler, sat with his parents across the room, sporting a bloody nose. Bryson threw the first punch, Principal Whitmore explained. "That's automatic suspension per school policy." "What did Tyler say to him?" Trevor interrupted. "Mr. Barnes, no, I want to know what was said that made my son, who has never been in a fight in his life, throw a punch." The principal sighed. "Tyler made some unkind comments about you and Miss Caldwell, about your relationship." Trevor's jaw tightened. "What kind of comments?" Bryson spoke for the first time, his voice thick with anger and shame. "He said you were dating her for money. That you were using her because we're poor. He called you, the boy's voice cracked. He called you a gold digger who was taking advantage of a rich widow. The room went very quiet. Trevor looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw the pain beneath the anger. Bryson wasn't just defending Trevor's honor. He was defending their family, their dignity, everything they had built in the 3 years since Catherine died. "I'm sorry, Dad," Bryson whispered, "but I couldn't let him say those things about you." Trevor put his arm around his son's shoulders. "We'll discuss appropriate responses later, but I understand why you did it." That evening, after serving Bryson's suspension and having a long talk about violence not being the answer, Trevor called Sienna. He'd been putting off this conversation for weeks, but Tyler's cruel words had forced his hand. "Can you come over tonight?" he asked. "After the kids are asleep? We need to talk." Sienna arrived at 9:30, her expression concerned. Trevor led her to the kitchen and made tea neither of them would drink. "Bryson got suspended today," Trevor began. "Got in a fight defending my honor." He told her what Tyler had said, watching her face tighten with anger. "That's horrible," Sienna said. "Those poor boys, having to hear that garbage." "It's not garbage, though," Trevor interrupted quietly. "Not entirely. People are talking, Sienna, about us, about the gap between our situations. And they're not entirely wrong to wonder." Sienna set down her teacup with a sharp click. "We've been through this, Trevor. I thought you were past worrying about what people think." "I am. Mostly, but my kids aren't, and they shouldn't have to defend our relationship to their classmates." Trevor ran his hand through his hair. "And there's something I haven't told you. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Sienna's expression shifted to wariness. "What? I'm in debt." "Serious debt. Medical bills from Catherine's treatment. We had insurance, but it didn't cover everything. I've been paying it down slowly, but I still owe almost $80,000. Trevor forced himself to meet her eyes. "So, when people say I'm with you for your money, part of me wonders if they're seeing something I'm trying not to see in myself. You think you're using me?" Sienna's voice was carefully controlled. "No, but I can't help wondering if somewhere subconsciously your wealth makes this easier, makes my life easier. And that thought makes me sick." Sienna stood and walked to the window, her back to him. Trevor waited, his heart pounding. "I have something to tell you too," she finally said. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." Trevor's stomach dropped. "What?" Sienna turned to face him. "When Richard died, the company was drowning. He had made some poor investments, trusted the wrong people. We were on the verge of bankruptcy." She paused. "I didn't inherit wealth, Trevor. I inherited debt. $2 million of it." Trevor stared at her. "What?" "I spent the first 2 years after his death just trying to keep the company afloat. Mortgaged everything, took out loans, worked 18-hour days. It's only in the last 3 years that I've actually turned a profit and started paying it all back." Sienna's laugh was bitter. "I'm a millionaire on paper, Trevor. In reality, I'm still climbing out of a hole. Why didn't you tell me?" "For the same reason you didn't tell me about your debt. Pride, shame, fear that you'd see me differently." She moved closer. "Everyone assumes I'm wealthy, that I have it all figured out. The truth is, I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'll make the wrong decision and lose everything. Terrified I'll end up alone because no one wants to deal with my complicated life." Trevor stood, processing this revelation. "So we're both broke. Technically, I'm asset-rich and cash-poor. You're just broke." Sienna smiled slightly. "But yes, we're both struggling financially in ways people don't see." Something shifted in Trevor's chest, a weightlifting that he hadn't even known he was carrying. "I thought you were so far above me, unreachable. I thought you were uncomplicated," Sienna countered, "that your life was simple and straightforward while mine was a mess." "Turns out we're both messes. Just different kinds." Trevor laughed, then Sienna joined him, and suddenly they were both laughing with the kind of relief that comes from finally telling the truth. "I can't believe we've been circling around this for months," Trevor said. "I can't believe we were both too proud to just be honest." Sienna reached for his hand. "So what now? Do we keep pretending to be people we're not, or do we try being who we actually are?" "I vote for honesty," Trevor said. Even if it's messy. Especially because it's messy. Sienna squeezed his hand. Trevor, I don't care about your debt. I care about you and your children. The money will work itself out. And I don't care about your complicated business situation. I care about you, Trevor paused. Though I have to admit it's a relief knowing you're not some untouchable millionaire. I'm very touchable, Sienna said with a smile. Just very busy paying off loans. They stood in his modest kitchen, holding hands and finally seeing each other clearly for the first time, not as a wealthy CEO and a struggling carpenter, but as two people trying to build good lives from the wreckage of loss, both carrying burdens they had been too ashamed to share. My kids need to know this, Trevor said. Especially Bryson. He needs to know I'm not using you. And my employees need to know you're not with me for my money, Sienna agreed. Not that I care what they think, but you do, and that matters. How do we do that? Sienna considered. We could start by just being ourselves. Stop pretending. Stop hiding our struggles. Let people see the truth instead of their assumptions. That sounds terrifying. It does, Sienna agreed. But probably less terrifying than continuing to hide. Trevor pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, her head resting on his shoulder. For the first time since they met, Trevor felt like they were actually standing on level ground, not carpenter and CEO, not struggling single dad and successful businesswoman, but two people who understood what it meant to fight for survival and try to build something better. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For trusting me with the truth. For not being perfect. Trevor kissed the top of her head. For being real. Thank you for the same, Sienna replied. Though I'm still not happy about what those boys said to Bryson. Neither am I, but at least now I know the truth. And truth is something we can work with. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, holding each other and finally understanding that what they had was built on something more solid than money or status. It was built on shared struggle, mutual respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, Trevor was learning, was worth more than any amount of wealth. The revelation changed everything and nothing at once. Trevor and Sienna were still the same people, facing the same struggles. But now they faced them together, without pretense, without the weight of unspoken secrets. A week after their honest conversation, Sienna called Trevor with an unexpected proposition. I have a business opportunity I want to discuss with you, she said. Can we meet for lunch? They met at a small restaurant halfway between his workshop and her office. Sienna arrived with a leather portfolio that she set on the table between them. Caldwell Enterprises is renovating our headquarters, she began without preamble. We need custom woodwork throughout. Conference tables, reception desk, office furniture, wall paneling in the executive suite. It's a 6-month project worth roughly $200,000. Trevor nearly choked on his water. $200,000. I want to offer you the contract, Sienna continued. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't charity. I've seen your work. I've watched you in your workshop. You're talented, Trevor. More than talented, you're an artist. This project needs someone with your skill level. Sienna, let me finish. She opened the portfolio, showing him sketches and specifications. I've already had 3 other carpentry firms submit bids. All of them are more expensive than what I'm offering you, and none of them have your eye for detail. This is a legitimate business opportunity, but I need to know if you can see it that way, or if your pride will get in the way. Trevor studied the plans, his craftsman's eye immediately seeing the possibilities. The work was complex, demanding, exactly the kind of challenge he loved. It would also solve his financial problems in one stroke, enough to pay off the medical debt and have money left over to expand his business, maybe even hire additional help. What would people say? He asked quietly. You're bored, your employees. They'd say you're giving your boyfriend a sweetheart deal. Let them say it, Sienna replied. I'm offering you fair market value for exceptional work. If our relationship bothers them, that's their problem, not ours. Trevor looked at the numbers again. Fair market value, she'd said. Not charity, not pity. A genuine contract based on his skills. I'd need to bring Garrett on full time, he said, thinking aloud. Maybe hire another apprentice. This is too much work for just me. The timeline allows for that. And there's a provision in the contract for hiring additional skilled labor. Sienna leaned forward. Trevor, I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding my company. I know what it's like to need a break, to need someone to take a chance on you. I'm taking that chance, but only if you can accept it without feeling like you owe me anything beyond good work. Trevor thought about Bryson, about the fight, about the boy defending his father's honor against accusations of being a gold digger. He thought about Catherine, about the medical debt that had hung over him like a cloud for 3 years. He thought about pride and practicality, about what it meant to accept help versus accepting an earned opportunity. I want to say yes, he said carefully, but I need time to think about it, to make sure I can do this right, that I can deliver what you need without our relationship complicating things. Fair enough, Sienna said. Take a few days. But Trevor, don't say no because you're afraid of what people might think. Say no, only if you genuinely don't want the work. That evening, Trevor sat at his kitchen table with the contract Sienna had left him. The specifications were detailed, professional, exactly what a legitimate business proposal should look like. There was nothing in it that suggested favoritism or special treatment, just a straightforward offer for skilled work at fair compensation. What's that? Bryson asked, appearing in the doorway. A job offer. A big one. Trevor gestured to the chair across from him. Want to talk about it? Bryson sat, and Trevor explained the opportunity, the scope of the work, the money, the fact that it came from Sienna's company. He watched his son's face carefully, looking for signs of discomfort or concern. That's a lot of money, Bryson said finally. It is. Would it pay off Mum's medical bills? Trevor's throat tightened. He hadn't realized Bryson knew about those. Yes, it would. Bryson was quiet for a long moment. Tyler said you were using Miss Sienna for money. But it's not using someone if you're working for it, right? If you're earning it? No, Trevor agreed. It's not. Then you should take it. Bryson looked at his father directly. Mom would want those bills paid off. And Miss Sienna is nice. She wouldn't offer if she didn't think you could do it. When did you get so wise? I've been listening to you my whole life, Bryson said with a slight smile. I had to pick up something. After Bryson went to bed, Trevor pulled out the photo album he kept on the shelf, the one filled with pictures of Catherine. He flipped through it slowly, remembering their life together, the dreams they'd had, the plans that cancer had stolen. On the last page was a photo from their 10th anniversary, the day she'd given him the toolbox that still sat in his workshop. Catherine was smiling at the camera, radiant despite being already sick, though they hadn't known it yet. Trevor had his arm around her, looking at her instead of the camera, the expression on his face one of complete adoration. I miss you, Trevor said quietly to the photograph. Every day I miss you, but I think I'm ready to move forward now. Not away from you, I'll never do that. But forward, toward something good. He traced her face with one finger. I hope you'd approve. I hope you'd like her. I think you would. He closed the album and sat in the quiet kitchen, thinking about second chances and new beginnings. Thinking about what it meant to honor the past while embracing the future. Thinking about love, not as something that replaced what came before, but as something that added to it, expanded it, made room for more. The next morning, Trevor called Sienna before he could second-guess himself. I want to accept the contract, he said. But I need to do this right. I want everything documented, everything professional. No special treatment, no shortcuts. If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it as a legitimate contractor, not as your boyfriend. I wouldn't have it any other way, Sienna replied. And he could hear the smile in her voice. And I want to be clear with your board and employees about our relationship. No hiding, no pretending. They deserve to know we're together, and they deserve to see that this contract is based on merit, not favoritism. Agreed. I'll arrange a meeting with the board next week. You can present your portfolio, show them your previous work. Let them see for themselves why I chose you. Trevor took a deep breath. Okay, let's do this. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Trevor spent the week preparing, organizing photos of his best work, creating a presentation that showcased his skills and experience. Garrett helped him practice, playing the role of skeptical board member and asking difficult questions. "You've got this," Garrett assured him the night before the meeting. "Just be yourself. Show them what you can do." But being himself had never felt more terrifying. Tomorrow, he would stand in front of a room full of executives and make his case, knowing that some of them would be looking for any excuse to prove he was unqualified, that Sienna was making a mistake. That night, as Trevor tried to sleep, his phone buzzed with a text from Sienna. "Remember, you earned this opportunity. Walk in there like you know it." Trevor smiled in the darkness. She was right. He had earned this through years of hard work, dedication to his craft, and the skill he had spent a lifetime developing. The fact that the woman offering him the contract also happened to be someone he cared about didn't diminish his qualifications. He fell asleep thinking about the presentation, about the future, about the possibility of finally, truly moving forward, not just surviving, but building something new and good from the foundation of everything he'd learned through loss and struggle. Tomorrow would be the test. Tomorrow, he would prove to himself and to everyone else that Trevor Barnes, carpenter and single father, was exactly the right person for this job, and if he was very lucky, he might also prove that second chances in love, in business, in life, were worth the risk of reaching for them. Trevor arrived at Caldwell Enterprises 30 minutes early, wearing his best clothes, not a suit he had decided, but clean work pants and a button-down shirt that split the difference between his world and theirs. He carried a leather portfolio Garrett had lent him, filled with photographs of his work and detailed specifications of past projects. The building was modern glass and steel, intimidating in its corporate perfection. Trevor took a deep breath before entering, reminding himself that he belonged here not as Sienna's boyfriend, but as a skilled craftsman with something valuable to offer. The receptionist directed him to the top floor. Sienna met him at the elevator, looking every inch the CEO in a charcoal suit, her expression professionally neutral. "They're ready for you," she said quietly. "Remember, this is your show. I'm just another board member in there." "Thank you," Trevor said, "for believing I could do this." "I don't believe you can do this," Sienna corrected with a slight smile. "I know you can. There's a difference." The boardroom was exactly as intimidating as Trevor had imagined. A long, polished table surrounded by leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and 8 well-dressed executives who regarded him with expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical. Sienna took her seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming. I've asked Trevor Barnes to present his qualifications for the headquarters renovation project." "Trevor?" Trevor stood, fighting the urge to let his nerves show. He opened his portfolio and began, "My name is Trevor Barnes. I've been a carpenter for 24 years, trained by my father, who was a master craftsman for 40 years before that. I specialize in custom woodwork, furniture, built-ins, architectural details." He passed around photographs of a dining table he'd made, the grain of the walnut catching the light beautifully. "This piece took me 6 weeks. Every joint is hand-cut mortise and tenon, no nails or screws. It'll last 100 years or more." One board member, a stern-looking woman named Patricia, examined the photo closely. "Impressive craftsmanship. But this is residential work. Our project is commercial scale." "Yes, ma'am," Trevor acknowledged. "But the principles are the same. Quality materials, precise measurements, attention to detail. I've also done commercial work." He showed photographs of the custom reception desk he'd built for a law firm, the built-in bookshelves for the public library. "I understand this project is larger than anything I've done before. That's why I've already spoken with 2 experienced carpenters about bringing them on. Garrett Chen, my current partner, and Walter Crane, who has 30 years of commercial experience." Another board member, an older man named Charles, leaned forward. "Let's address the elephant in the room. You're in a personal relationship with our CEO. How do we know this contract is based on merit and not favoritism?" Trevor had prepared for this question, but it still made his heart pound. "You don't," he said honestly. "Not yet. That's why I'm here, to prove I can do the work. I'm not asking you to trust me based on who I know. I'm asking you to evaluate me based on what I can deliver. And if we decide you're not qualified," Patricia asked, "then you should choose someone else," Trevor said simply. "I want this contract because it's the kind of work I love, because it would challenge me to grow as a craftsman. But I don't want it if you're only giving it to me to make Ms. Caldwell happy. That wouldn't be fair to you, to me, or to her." The room was silent for a moment. Trevor could feel his shirt sticking to his back with nervous sweat, but he kept his expression steady. Charles spoke again. "You mentioned bringing on additional help. How would you manage a team on a project this size?" Trevor relaxed slightly, back on familiar ground. "I'd start by creating detailed plans for each phase of work. The reception desk and conference tables would be built in my workshop, then installed on site. The built-in shelving and wall paneling would be measured and fitted on location. I'd assign specific tasks based on each craftsman's strengths. Garrett excels at finishing work, while Walter has extensive experience with large-scale installations. For the next 20 minutes, Trevor answered questions about timelines, materials, contingency plans. He showed sketches he'd made based on the specifications, explaining his vision for how traditional craftsmanship could be integrated into a modern corporate space. Finally, Sienna spoke. "Thank you, Trevor. If you'll wait outside, we'll discuss and call you back in." Trevor gathered his materials and left, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He sat in the waiting area, staring at the city beyond the windows, trying to read meaning into every sound from the boardroom. 20 minutes later, the door opened. Patricia emerged and gestured him back inside. Trevor returned to find the board members in various states of contemplation. Sienna's expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Charles cleared his throat. "Mr. Barnes, we've discussed your presentation. Before we make our decision, I have one final question." Trevor's heart sank. Here it came, the rejection, the polite explanation of why they needed someone more experienced. "If we approve this contract," Charles continued, "and problems arise during the project, how would you handle conflicts of interest given your relationship with Ms. Caldwell?" Trevor met his gaze steadily. "The same way I'd handle any client relationship, with professionalism and honesty. If there's a problem, I'd address it directly. Miss Caldwell would expect nothing less." Charles nodded slowly, then looked around the table at his fellow board members. One by one they nodded. "Then congratulations, Mr. Barnes," Charles said. "Pending contract negotiations, you have the job." Trevor stood frozen for a moment, certain he had misheard. "I what?" "You have the job," Patricia said, and there was something approaching respect in her expression. "Your presentation was thorough, your work speaks for itself, and your honesty about the potential conflicts was refreshing. We'll have our legal team draw up the contracts." Trevor looked at Sienna, who was smiling now, no longer hiding behind professional neutrality. "Thank you," he managed. "All of you. I won't let you down." After the board members filed out, leaving Trevor and Sienna alone in the conference room, he sank into one of the leather chairs, his legs suddenly unsteady. "I did it," he said, more to himself than to her. "You did," Sienna confirmed, sitting beside him. "And you did it on your own merit. I'm proud of you." Trevor looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not the CEO or the wealthy businesswoman, but simply Sienna, the woman who had taken his mortifying comment with grace, who had been patient with his insecurities, who had trusted him with her own vulnerabilities, who had offered him an opportunity but made him earn it. "I need to tell you something," he said. Sienna's smile faded slightly. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. Trevor took a breath. "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Sienna's eyes widened, her professional composure cracking to show genuine emotion beneath. "Trevor, I know we agreed to take things slow," he continued. "I know there's still a lot we're figuring out. But sitting in there presenting to your board, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for the contract. I was fighting to prove I could be worthy of you. Not because of money or status, but because you deserve someone who's willing to work for what matters, who's willing to step outside their comfort zone and be brave. Sienna reached for his hand. You've always been worthy of me. You just needed to see it yourself. I'm starting to, Trevor said. Finally, and I'm starting to see that maybe we can make this work, not despite our different worlds, but because we're both willing to meet in the middle. I love you too, Sienna said softly. I think I have since that first coffee, when you were so nervous you could barely hold your cup steady, when you showed me pictures of your work and your whole face lit up, when you talked about your children like they were the center of your universe. Trevor pulled her closer. I'm terrified, he admitted, of screwing this up, of not being enough. You're enough, Sienna interrupted firmly. More than enough. And I'm terrified too, of losing you, of having found something real and somehow ruining it. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone. They sat together in the empty boardroom, holding hands and letting the weight of their confessions settle around them. Outside the windows, the city stretched endlessly, full of people living their own complicated lives, fighting their own battles, searching for their own moments of connection. The kids need to know, Trevor said eventually. About us, about how serious this is. Are you ready for that? Trevor thought about Autumn's innocent questions, about Bryson's protective instincts, about the conversation he'd had with Catherine's photograph. I think so. They like you. Autumn adores you and Bryson is warming up. But I need them to understand that you're not replacing their mother. You're adding to the family, Sienna finished. I understand. And I would never try to replace Catherine. She was their mother, and she'll always have that place in their hearts and yours. Thank you, Trevor said. For understanding that, Sienna squeezed his hand. I have something for you. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out 2 tickets. There's a concert next month. The symphony is doing an evening of classical pieces. Catherine's favorite composer is on the program. I saw it in one of the photos at your house. The CD collection. Trevor took the tickets, his throat tight with emotion. Brahms. Catherine had loved Brahms, had played his symphonies while cooking dinner, had called his music the sound of someone who understood heartbreak and beauty in equal measure. You remembered, he said. I pay attention, Sienna replied. I thought maybe we could go together, honor her memory while building ours. It was such a simple gesture, yet it meant everything. Sienna understood that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, that loving someone new didn't erase loving someone lost, that there was room in her heart for both grief and joy, both past and future. Trevor kissed her then. There in the empty boardroom where he had just proven himself, where he had just taken the first real step toward a future he hadn't dared to imagine 3 months ago. When they finally pulled apart, Sienna was smiling. So, Mr. Barnes, ready to renovate my headquarters and change both our lives? Absolutely terrified and completely ready, Trevor said. Which seems to be my natural state around you. Good, Sienna said. I'd hate for you to get bored. They left the building together, walking into the afternoon sunlight, both of them understanding that something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just dating anymore, weren't just cautiously exploring a connection. They were committed to the work, to each other, to building something real from the honest foundation they had finally established. It wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, still be moments when their different backgrounds created friction. But they would face those challenges together with honesty and courage and love. 6 months later, Trevor stood in the newly renovated headquarters of Caldwell Enterprises, running his hand along the reception desk he had built. The wood was cherry, selected for its warm tones and beautiful grain. Every joint was perfect, every surface smooth as glass. It was some of his finest work, and he felt a quiet pride looking at it. Dad, come look at this. Trevor turned to see Autumn running toward him across the polished lobby floor, Sienna following at a more measured pace, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. Bryson trailed behind them, trying to look too cool to be impressed, but failing to hide his interest in the elaborate built-in shelving that lined one wall. What do you think? Trevor asked his children. It's beautiful, Autumn said, spinning in a circle to take in the entire space. You made all of this? Me, Garrett, and Walter. It was a team effort. Bryson approached the shelving, examining the joinery with the critical eye Trevor had been teaching him. "This is really good work, Dad. The corners are perfect." Coming from his 11-year-old son, it was high praise. Trevor felt his chest swell with emotion. The past 6 months had transformed more than just the Caldwell Enterprises headquarters. The contract had allowed Trevor to pay off Catherine's medical debt entirely. That crushing weight finally lifted from his shoulders. He had expanded his workshop, hired Walter permanently, and taken on Bryson as an apprentice on weekends. His son showed real talent, patient hands, and a good eye for detail. More importantly, Trevor and Sienna had built something solid together. It hadn't been without challenges. There were still moments when his insecurity flared, when her demanding schedule created tension, when they had to navigate the complicated dynamics of blending their very different lives. But they faced those challenges together now. With honesty and patience, Sienna had become a regular presence in their home, joining them for dinners and helping with homework, attending Autumn's art shows and Bryson's basketball games. She didn't try to be their mother. No one could replace Catherine. But she was becoming something equally important, a trusted adult who cared about them. Someone who expanded their family rather than trying to replace what they'd lost. "Can we show her?" Autumn asked, tugging on Trevor's sleeve. "Show me what?" Sienna asked, curious. Bryson pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack. "Autumn made something. For you." Autumn unfolded it carefully, revealing a pencil drawing. It showed 5 stick figures holding hands. Trevor in the middle, Autumn and Bryson on one side, Sienna on the other. And there, sketched lightly in the background like a guardian angel, was a 5th figure with a crown on her head. "That's our family now," Autumn explained. "You and Dad and me and Bryson. And Mom is still there too, watching over us. Mrs. Kowalski says that's how it works. The people we love never really leave." Sienna's eyes filled with tears. She knelt down to Autumn's level. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. May I keep it?" "That's why I made it for you," Autumn said matter-of-factly. "So you'd know you're part of our family now." Sienna looked up at Trevor, and he saw in her expression everything he felt: gratitude, joy, and the bittersweet awareness that good things often come wrapped in complicated emotions. She stood and carefully folded the drawing, holding it like the treasure it was. "Thank you," she said to Autumn. "I'll put this somewhere very special." That evening, after the children were in bed, Trevor and Sienna sat on his back porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Mrs. Kowalski's light was on across the fence, and somewhere down the street someone was playing music. "Autumn's drawing," Sienna said quietly. "Did you see it coming?" "With her? Never. She has a way of cutting straight to the heart of things." Trevor reached for Sienna's hand. "But she's right. You are part of our family now." "If you want to be, I want to be," Sienna confirmed. "Though I never imagined my life would look like this. Single dad, 2 kids, a modest house with a fence that needs painting." "Having regrets?" Trevor asked, only half joking. "Not a single one." Sienna leaned her head on his shoulder. "I spent 5 years building a company, proving I could succeed, making more money than I knew what to do with. And I was miserable, lonely, going through the motions. Then I met a carpenter who said something inappropriate at a party, and everything changed." Trevor laughed. "I'm never going to live that down, am I?" "Never," Sienna agreed cheerfully. "It's part of our story now. The mortifying beginning that led to everything else." They sat in comfortable silence, and Trevor thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that awkward encounter at the fundraiser to this moment of peaceful contentment. He thought about Catherine, about the love they'd shared and the grief that had nearly consumed him. He thought about his children, resilient and brave, learning to open their hearts again. He thought about Sienna, who had been patient with his fears and generous with her trust. "I'm happy," Trevor said, surprised by the simple truth of it. "For the first time in 3 years, I'm actually happy." "Me too," Sienna replied. "Scared and hopeful and happy all at once." "That sounds about right." Inside the house, Trevor's phone buzzed with a photo from Mrs. Kowalski. It was Autumn's drawing, which Sienna had shown her earlier. The message read, "Catherine would be so proud of all of you." This is exactly what she would have wanted. You building a beautiful life. The children thriving, everyone loved and cared for. Trevor showed the message to Sienna, and they both smiled through tears. Life wasn't perfect. There would still be struggles, still be moments of doubt and difficulty. But sitting here on his back porch, with Sienna's hand in his children safe asleep inside, the medical debt finally paid, and work that fulfilled him, Trevor understood that perfect wasn't the goal. Real was the goal. Honest was the goal. Love in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms was the goal, and somehow, against all odds, he had found it again, not in spite of his awkward beginning with Sienna, but perhaps because of it, because sometimes the most mortifying moments lead to the most meaningful connections, and sometimes saying exactly the wrong thing to exactly the right person changes everything. Trevor kissed the top of Sienna's head and looked up at the stars, feeling Catherine's presence in the gentle breeze, in the laughter of his children, in the second chance at happiness he had almost been too afraid to reach for. "Thank you," he whispered to the universe, to Catherine, to whatever force had brought Sienna into his life, and in the quiet evening, surrounded by love both old and new, Trevor Barnes finally understood that he didn't have to choose between honoring the past and embracing the future. He could do both.